So we've discussed the fact that there are 5 factors that develop a child, 5 factors that develop a human being. And it's important to know all 5 factors. One is nature. So the DNA of the child. There are many things that go into the makeup of the child well before the child is even born. There's the environment, the neighborhood, the school situation, and friends. And then there's the chinuch. That's the education that parents and their surrogates give the child. There's tefillah, and that's a major part of it. Prayer, very significant. We talked about that. Then, of course, number 5 is the child makes his own choices. So what I want to talk about for a minute to begin with is that it's very important to appreciate the fact that a great deal of a child's makeup is not within our control. Let us see what we can and cannot do. So I have an excerpt here from a very wonderful book by Sarah Chana Radcliffe. It's entitled Raise Your Kids, Raising Your Voice, that has a little exercise for us about what we can and cannot do. You can treat your children with respect, even when you're stressed. You can react gently and patiently to their mistakes. You can show them affection with hugs, gifts, care, and loving words. You can attend compassionately to their feelings, giving them emotional support. You can appropriate expectations and goals and help your children work towards them. You can expose them to your values and beliefs. You can teach them about their history and their identity. You can teach them a spiritual discipline. You can behave consistently and dependently with them. You can teach them certain skills. You can model behaviors. Do you see a theme developing? You can implement various types of discipline. You can increase your parenting options by continuing studying and learning parenting approaches. You can provide for all your children's physical needs. You can provide them with every educational, leisure, and medical benefit you can afford or arrange. You can provide them with opportunities to develop their interests, talents, and skills. You can take care of yourself and reduce your stress, enabling you to be a more relaxed, healthy parent. You can protect your mental and physical health so that you can operate at your full potential. You can work on your marriage. You can consult professionals and/or clergy for family guidance. You can continue to grow and improve as a human being, giving your children a model for growth and improvement. What are all of these? All of these are things that you yourself can do. You can pray for your children's well-being and success. Now let's read her list of things that you cannot do. And let's contrast them. Oh, absolutely. You can't ensure that your children will be happy. What parent doesn't want their children to be happy? You cannot ensure that your children will be happy. You cannot ensure that your children will be mentally well. You can't ensure that your children will be physically well. You can't ensure that your children will succeed in school. You can't ensure that your children will have a large circle of friends. You can't ensure that your children will have a desirable career. You cannot ensure that your children will get married or stay married. You can't ensure that your children will get along with their siblings. You can't ensure that your children will hold all of your beliefs and values as much as you want. You can't ensure that your children would choose a life just like yours. You can't ensure that your children will enjoy the things you enjoy. You can't ensure that your spouse will be an excellent parent. That's a tough one. You can't ensure that your children will grow up in peace and prosperity. You can't ensure that your children will have high self-esteem or confidence. You can't ensure that your children will always be safe. What we do for the safety of our children. How much we worry about the safety of our children. End of the day, you can't ensure it. You can't ensure that your children's teachers will be good. You can't ensure that your children's relatives will be supportive and loving. Sometimes you want to just kill them, but that's the way it is. You can't ensure that others will always treat your child well. You can't save your children from pain. So the things that you can do is about your behavior. It's about parents' behavior. The things that you can't are someone else's choice, someone outside of ourselves. It could be our spouse, as much as we would like. Can't always control how our spouse will behave with the children. Teachers, relatives, and you certainly can't control what the child himself will choose. Every person has bechira chafshis. Everyone has free choice. And also, so much of life's circumstance that we don't choose. The circumstances which are dealt to us by the Ribono Shel Olam, by God. It's not our choosing. And therefore, here's the upshot of the whole thing. As parents, we can only measure our success by our own behaviors. So we came to study parenting, and we came to study how we can affect the children, and ultimately, it's about affecting ourselves. It's about changing ourselves, about elevating ourselves. Only then we can worry what happens to our children. This said, and I am going to wink at everyone and say that when we indeed put our house in order, vis-a-vis ourselves and our children, so then that's when we're going to have, everything said, that's when we're going to have a very strong impact. In regard to what we can do, what's the most critical? Most critical thing of everything. Hopefully over the weeks, and maybe we'll break for the summer for a while, but over the weeks, we're going to discuss many, many parenting strategies and approaches. But what is arguably the most important, most critical aspect of influencing our children, and that is a loving relationship. That's most critical. If we're going to affect, ultimately, their behavior, their values, it's got to be through a loving relationship. Now here, I think what comes in here is something called the magic ratio. Have you heard of the magic ratio? There is the foremost marriage therapist, marriage theorist in the world is a man by the name of Dr. John Gottman. John Gottman studied marriage for many, many years. He happens to be a religious Jew who wears a yarmulke. And he's considered the foremost authority on marriage. And he actually has principles by which you can predict the ultimate health of a marriage. And when you read his works and you study his theories, you realize this gentleman is spot on. He's very, very good. And he has this theory about relationships, specifically about marriage, but I think we can easily use it for a relationship with children. And I think maybe it's more pertinent. It fits even more neatly with relationship with children. And this is something that he calls the magic ratio. And it's a ratio of 5-1, positive interacting with negative interactions. For a relationship to be strong, there has to be 5 times, 5-1 ratio of positive interaction against negative interaction. Those interactions, even that sometimes mean at a time of discord, at a time of debate, at a time of disagreement, even then, very important, it should be 5-1. A relationship could survive one negative interaction as long as it's grouped or it's interspersed with 5 positive interactions. You say, oh, that's pretty easy. I'm not so sure. I think that's pretty good. And if this is true for a marriage, again, I think it's very true for a parent-child relationship. Because a child looks to his parents for warmth, for validation, for security. A child desperately wants to respect and love his parent, desperately wants it. Very often a child will give all sorts of answers for why my mother, why my father does this and that and the other thing. And sometimes it'll take years and years and years to realize that that's wrong. A child might be 20, 30, 40 years old to turn around and say, I can't believe my father and mother did that. It was normal for them for a very, very long time. Why? Because they have a desperate need. They want to respect their parents and they want to love their parents, and they're looking for a rational and emotional means to do so. They want to have the wherewithal. They want to have the intellectual and the emotional stuff, if we could call it that, in order to love their parents. My mother, she should live and be well. Before she retired at the ripe old age of, I think it was 27 or 28, to devote her time fully to her children, she was a social worker. She would always tell us the story of this girl who was in a very difficult family situation. Mother was pretty abusive. And she would talk to my mother about the relationship. And one day this girl came in with tears in her eyes. She had been given by her mother a handkerchief, something so nominal, something so, in the scope of things, so nothing. But she came to my mother and she showed her, look what my gift my mother gave me. It was so meaningful for her. Some snatch of love, something that she could hold on to. Maybe my mother loves me. It was so, that's what kids have. That's what we have. And so we're looking for a good reason, a good excuse. So if the environment is created properly with this 5-to-1 ratio, or hopefully better than a 5-to-1 ratio, so then if we can give children a predominantly positive experience, then with the help of God, the natural love can flourish. Again, I say can, because it's not in our hands. There are a lot of other factors. Now, these experiences are very varied. Positive experiences. These 5-to-1 ratio, positive experience, negative experience. Both positive and negative experiences can be very active and direct, and some of them can be peripheral or secondary, but yet they are positive and negative experience. Let's talk about the positive first. Expressions of affection, expressions of love, most notably being interested. Being interested in the child. Being interested in what the child says. Very often, it will be what we would call in Yiddish, Narishkeit. You know what the word Narishkeit means? It comes from the word Na'ar, which means lad. It's foolish because it's simplistic, because it's babyish, because it's from a kid. It's Narishkeit. So we call things that to us are irrelevant and not important and uninteresting, we call them Narishkeit. But from a child of 3, what are we going to get? We're going to get Narishkeit. So if we respond to it like a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old, that's Narishkeit. If that's our feeling about it, then that's what we tell the kid. Hopefully we don't say it to the kid, oh, that's so silly, what's the difference? But if we communicate it, that's not a very good feeling. Daddy or mommy doesn't care for what I care for. So the child comes, he found an insect in the sandbox. And to him, it's like he just discovered a world. He just discovered a world, and he comes to his mommy or his daddy with this insect in the sandbox, and the parent can either say, feh, I don't like bugs, get that out of my house, right? And dashes the child's entire world over to take it and say, ooh, let's take a look at this. Well, holding back the urge to regurgitate or something, the mother says, ooh, let's go find a magnifying glass, let's look at this a little better. It makes such a whole difference. It's such a different experience. For the teenager comes home, he pulled some prank in school, and the parent is like, oh, what did you do? That's like this silly, you're supposed to be studying in school. That's the way you spend your time in school. But for the child, it's very important. It's what interests them. It's not what interests us. And when we are interested in what interests them, so then there's an amazing expression of love, of affection to them. To listen to them. To really listen. Now, I don't like saying this, but this day and age, really listening is very hard. We're not used to really listening. We're used to multitasking. We're doing 10 things at once, and of course we know, or at least some of us, I should say, multitask. I know some people in the room don't like multitasking, and may they be blessed. But it's something that people do. They get used to doing several things at once. So a child comes, he's got something very significant, and we're playing with our phones, or we're sitting at the supper table and we're playing with our phones, or we're looking some very interesting thing, or we're waiting for a very important email or something like that. So when we listen, we need to make eye contact. And the Sfarim say that through the eyes we see the neshama. You look at somebody in the eyes. It's scary sometimes to look at somebody in the eyes. Some people have a harder time to do that with others. I used to have a chavrusa. I should say I still have a chavrusa, very dear chavrusa. This is his big joke with me. He would say, "Stop that! You're looking in my eyes." That was his big joke. It's hard sometimes because it's very meaningful. It's very meaningful to look at somebody in the eye, and to look a child in the eye, and to see the neshama there, to focus for a minute, and see this child is so important. Direct, positive interactions. That's what we're looking for. Direct, positive interactions. It includes verbalizing affection. Again, for some of us, it's very hard. Very hard. Why? That's part of our DNA. It might be something psychoanalytic. It might be something, from our childhood, but sometimes we just have a hard time. Hugs, touch. Touch is such a powerful thing. Touch is such a powerful thing. That's why touch between the genders in our religion is proscribed, because just a touch is very, very significant. There are studies about returning change at a store, returning change. So whether the cashier touched the hand of the person, right? So they walked out, and then they asked these people who got their change, how would they appreciate their experience in the store? So if I remember correctly, it was statistically significant. The people who the cashier touched had felt much closer, warmer about the store, had a much better feeling about the store. Just touch in itself, how important it is to touch, affectionate, touching. Of course, this is all age appropriate. What I mean by that is, sometimes you try to touch your 15-year-old son, like, get away from me. You have to know when and where and how. When is a hug, and sometimes it's going to be a turn-off. It's not going to be something. But for each age. And then we get positive interactions, a smile. The power of a smile in this religion. A smile is so important. It's actually religious directive. Having b'kabbalas kol adam b'sever panim yafos. It's an obligation articulated by the great Shammai in the Mishnah and Avos. to smile. A person walks around with a smile in his home. That's very significant. Or he flashes a smile to a son, flashes a smile to a daughter on a regular basis. It's an amazing thing. It's a very important habit to get into. Some of us naturally are serious, or we have serious looks on our faces. Some of us are a little bit dour, a little bit, we have a sad look. Some of us are just look like that. But it's important. And children form all sorts of ideas about our mood and our feeling towards them by just how we look at them. Sever panim yafos is so important. Compliments. And I hope one day to talk more about this. This is a very, believe it or not, it's a controversial topic. How much should one compliment a person? But in my very humble opinion, and I say that seriously, I never understood that at all. I never understood that at all. Complimenting a proper, legitimate, serious compliment is so important. So important. In life, we often get lost. We get lost with what is really important to us. I think if we back up and really focus on what this child means to us, all of this will become that much easier. If we take a moment every so often really to think what this child means to me. I want to go back to the world of marriage and tell you a great medrash. It's one of my most favorite midrashim. The medrash says that there was a couple. This is a medrash Shir Hashirim. There was a couple that 10 years they were married and they didn't have any children. And there's actually room, we don't practice it this way anymore today, but there's room for once 10 years, we assume, probably won't have children, and the man has an obligation to have children, and maybe they should split up. So they went to the great Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and they asked him, please, we want to get a bill of divorce. We want to get a get. We want a divorce. So he looked at them. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, of course, the great Kabbalist, the great thinker. He looks at them, and he says to them, you got married with a big wedding. It was a big bash. I want you to get divorced with one too. Call the caterer. Call the band. We're going to have a party. So they do that. They arrange for a huge party. How strange. They arrange for a huge party, and they have a absolute bash. The Medrash says that she, smart woman, she begins to ply him with alcohol. And he gets pretty inebriated. At one point he comes to, and he looks around and he sees his wife, and he says, my daughter, I think that's the language of the Medrash, my daughter, I'm going to miss you. I'll tell you what, take your most precious possession, your prized possession that you have in my house, and take it with you back to your father's house. Go back to your father's house and take your most prized possession. She says, really? Thank you. It's so beautiful. And she continues to give him to drink. And he passes out. She says to her servants, quick, grab that man, put him on a bed, take him to my father's house. The Medrash picks up several hours later. He comes to. He's looking around and he says to himself, my words, not the Medrash's words, golly, where did I just find myself? I think I'm in of all places, my father-in-law's house. He looks around, and who's sitting there at the foot of his bed? His wife. He says to her, this feels so surreal. But I happen to be in your father's house? He said, yeah. He said, well, what on earth am I doing here? We're supposed to get divorced. She says, don't you remember? You said to me that you could take that which is most precious to me to my Father's house. There's nothing in the world more precious to me than you. Oh, now it seems between the lines of the Medrash something changed. They go back to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, great to hear, great to hear. Now I'm going to be mispalel for you. Now I'm going to daven for you. The Medrash goes on. Sure enough, they were able to have a child. There's a lot to be discussed about that particular Medrash. But for me, what is most pertinent is 10 years went by, 10 years of stress, 10 years of issues. In that particular case, not having children. Very often the stress, how do you like that? Is having children. Is changing the diapers. Is quibbling with a spouse about which crib to get. Is who's going to put the car seat in. It's stress and very often we lose sight of what's incredibly important. That there's nothing more important in the world than this child. And oh boy, then they go off to school, and then the first report card comes home, and then they don't measure up, and it's not exactly the way I thought it would be, and I wished I didn't see that in my son's personality, and it just builds and builds and builds, and we forget the underlying love. But if we take the opportunity to really sit back and really appreciate what this child, this bundle of used to be joy, hopefully one day again will be joy, even in the most difficult of times, means to me. So then all of these positive expressions and affection, this could come. But then there's the elephant in the room. So we're getting very excited about positive interactions, about praise, about affection, about touch, about hug, about praise, about you name it. And then there's the big elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is criticism. Criticism. Criticism is so prevalent. In our shul, we have a new psychological term. I don't know if you've heard about it yet. I don't think it's in the American Psychological Association handbook yet, but I think one day it will be. And what we call it reverse obsessive compulsive disorder. Reverse obsessive compulsive. Of course, God forbid, obsessive compulsive disorder is a very, very difficult disease, and that's when somebody is stuck on various behaviors. They're obsessed with certain things and they have compulsions. Reverse obsessive compulsive disorder is when I am obsessed with you and I have a compulsion about you and therefore I criticize you. This disease is rampant. So many parents are stricken with reverse obsessive compulsive disorder. They cannot stop criticizing their child over and over and over again. Very often it's about nothing. Sometimes the criticism will be contradictory. One day they'll have done one thing, the next day they'll do the other. It's not the point of what they're doing, it's just they have a compulsion. It's possible that the reason for this illness is really the same thing as obsessive compulsive disorder. I believe part of this obsessive compulsive disorder is you need control. You have to get control of your life. And the parent needs to get control. They feel they don't have control. You know, part of what we started discussing in the beginning is that indeed, much of what happens with the child is not in our control. But very often we want to control because we care so much and we love so much, and therefore we try to make everything right now, today. It's got to be good the way I want it, and therefore we criticize. Criticism in this religion should be used very sparingly. So the rabbi in the back of the room is going to raise his hand and say, "Excuse me? Criticism is a very important thing in this religion." There's a mitzvah in the Torah called Hocheach Tochias Es Amisecha. you shall certainly rebuke your people. So there's a mitzvah saseh d'orais. There's a positive mitzvah in the Torah to give criticism. No question about it. By the way, it's juxtaposed to the verse of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow as yourself. But let's back up for a second. Let's ask ourselves the following question. Does criticism work? Does criticism work? Well, I think we have someone out in the field, a parent. He's saying criticism doesn't work. What do you mean? Why, Leon, how could you say that? The Torah says criticize. But let's research a little further. The Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu only gave criticism to Klal Yisrael at the end of his life. And Chazal explained, he only gave it at the end of his life. Why did he give it only at the end of his life? Let me read you a Rashi. Yeah. Rashi says these words. This is on the third verse in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. Melame shelo hochichon elo samuch lemisa. Moshe Rabbeinu only rebuked the Jewish people before his death. Mimi lamad. Who did he learn that from? What was Moshe Rabbeinu's source for this? Yaakov, the great patriarch, Jacob. He only rebuked his sons before their death. I'm telling you, why didn't I rebuke all these years? And then the Rashi goes on. But the bottom line is, I don't want to get too deeply into this, but the bottom line is, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses didn't rebuke. Oh, the mitzvah to rebuke. He didn't rebuke until the end of his life. Yaakov Avinu didn't rebuke at the end of his life. And I want to take it a little step further. There's a Medrash Tanchuma that extols the virtues of Ruvain, Shimon and Levi, for having accepted that rebuke. Basically, what this source is telling us is, he only rebuked, Yaakov Avinu only rebuked his children at the end of his life. Seemingly, because otherwise it wouldn't have worked. And then those three children are praised incredibly by the Medrash because they listened. So it's to their great credit. It's like a chidush. It's something novel. They accepted the rebuke. Whoa! So let's go back to the question: does rebuke work? So Leon says no, but I think from these sources we could say almost never, because if the great Reuven, Shimon, and Levi they are praised for accepting this rebuke, it almost never works. I want to read to you a few lines from the writing of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky on the mitzvah of rebuke. It's a long essay, and one day we should learn the whole thing together. It's a beautiful essay. Rabbi Kamenetsky writes, the Torah is revealing to us tzurasa shel mitzvahs tochacha mahi, the very form of the mitzvah of tochacha, what it is. What is the mitzvah to rebuke someone? The mitzvah to rebuke, is that in the section of the Torah between man and God, or the part of the Torah between man and man? So he assumes in his question that has to do. You're taking God's side. You're saying, "Ooh, God said don't do that." So it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment between man and God. He says, no. He says, this is interspersed with all the mitzvos of Beiranu Lachavero, between man and man. The mitzvahs of Sinah, V'avas reya, God forbid, hating another person, loving a friend, nakima, vengeance. These are all, or bearing a grudge. V'hainu shehegdira lanu Torah. The Torah is explaining to us she yisod mitzvahs tochacha, the essence of the mitzvah of tochacha. Tzricha lios she'achote margish. The essence of the mitzvah of rebuke is that the sinner feels ki'ilu hamochiach osa lo tova gedola, but mashu mochiach oso. He's got to know. The person who's being rebuked has to know he's doing this because he loves me. And basically he goes on to say that if that's not part of the equation, he doesn't understand, so then it's not going to work, and it's not tochacha. He says the word tochacha comes from the word lahochiach, to prove something. That's all. You want to prove something right. You want to get something straight. So it's not even, we're saying that the granddaddy of all negative experiences that a child or anyone else for that matter has is criticism. If it's criticism, if it's a negative interaction, that's... Actually, the Talmud said it. The Talmud said, how many years, 2,000? You're a scholar. About 2,000 years ago, the Talmud said, right, that I don't know if there's anyone in this generation who knows how to rebuke. Now, I am not, God forbid, saying that there's no longer a mitzvah to rebuke someone. Not saying that at all. I'm also not saying that if you see somebody doing wrong on the spot, and the commentaries on that Rashi pointed out, if you see somebody doing wrong, you say, oh, stop. Oh, stop. At the time of doing something wrong, of course you stop a person from doing wrong. And to tell somebody to do something right, of course. What we're talking about is after the fact. We're talking about is something that doesn't have to do with a particular action that somebody's going to do. It's interesting. I just want to say also, Zalman Sorotskin makes the point on this Rashi. He says, I would have assumed that there's more of an obligation when it comes to a parent or to a mentor. And he says, you have to be more careful. He explains that Rashi to say, you know why they waited to the end? Because it was a parent. If it was for a child to not listen, and time again, so he waited to the end of his life, where it would be the most effective. Because he was afraid that if he would give rebuke earlier, and then it would be violated, that would be the end of the world. That he would be violating his parents' word. And this is something we really have to keep in mind. If we tell a child something, if we have a pretty good chance that he's not going to listen, you have to really consider how to go about this. Just to let him violate our word is not a good thing. That doesn't mean we can't set boundaries. We have to set boundaries. We can't say no. Of course, all these things. But we have to take into account what's going to happen. Say no. Telling him something, him saying no, that's not a very good thing. Anyway, criticism is something which could be so detrimental. And often, as Leon says, it often just doesn't work. And we have to realize why we're doing this. Is it because we have this compulsion to get it right now? Or is it because it's something which is indeed going to be effective? So I think, again, criticism is the big elephant in the room. That's the thing which is often going to give the negative interaction. And we have to really work on that. It would be worth our while to consider taking notes, go through a certain amount of period in our life, in our day, and asking ourselves how many positive interactions as opposed to how many negative interactions. That might be something which is very helpful. And that's direct. And then you have many indirect things. How often it is, and I see personally this, that negative interactions also could be indirect. I mean, if a child sees us in a bad mood, it doesn't play very well. It doesn't fit very well. And if you think about it, that is true not only of children, it's true of anyone. We like to be around people who are happy, people who are smiling, people who are not moody. We don't feel good around other types of people. Certainly children are that way as well. Believe it or not, studies show, and I saw this in that book from Sarah Hannah Radcliffe, she says studies show that the ratio between people, this is children, the ratio of positive experiences to negative experiences, believe it or not, is 94% to 6%. 94% of negative interactions as opposed to 6%. And if you think about it, putting a child to sleep, for example, or getting a child off to school, how many times we give instructions which might not be appreciated? How many times we criticize, don't do that, do this. So much of what we do, the truth is, has to be done, has to be said. So we have to think, have to work on how exactly we're saying it, right? And if we're balancing it out at that time and other parts of the day, if we're balancing that out with a positive experience. If we know that there are going to be 7 or 8 things while we're getting our kids off to school that morning, 7 or 8 things that are going to be negative experiences, right? So maybe we have to up our game as to how we wake up the child. Maybe it should be with a song. Maybe we could, wake them up with an extra special kiss. But having this ratio in mind, which is so important. It's important in any relationship. It's important in marriage, and it's very important with children. So just a brief recap. Okay, we reviewed the factors which go into development of a human being. 5 factors. Many of which not under our control. The nature is not in control. Much of the environment's not in our control. We can try to change the environment, which is very important. We have to look to that. But still, there are parts that are just not in our control. The chinuch, much of the education is in our control, but very often there's 2 to tango. There are 2 parents, and there's extended family, and they have a lot to do with their grandparents. Sometimes, grandparents cannot be to our liking. They might not have the same philosophy, and they mix in, and they're there. We have to. And of course, there's Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and we try to affect that with tefillah, and then the child's choice. Through this all, we realize that part of it's under our control. Much of it isn't. Our success is measured by how we change ourselves. Most critical is the relationship. Really, that's the whole class today is about building the relationship. The 5-to-1 ratio, Gottman's 5-to-1 ratio of marriage, positive interactions as opposed to negative interactions, all the things, lining up those positive interactions by seeing the neshama of the child, the depth and how much we really love them through it all. We can try to tap into that, so then the affection, the listening will come out. The elephant in the room in this whole ratio, which is criticism, which many of us have a real challenge, and to try to get over this reverse obsessive compulsive disorder, that it's not about the child. Very often it's about us needing the control, and to try to rein that in, and appreciation that there are secondary parts to these positive experience and negative experience, and which have a major effect as well. So I hope there are some useful ideas here, and the Be'ez Hashem will meet again soon. Thank you. Any questions? Any issues or anything?
Just observation.
Yeah.
It's definitely concepts that can be applied. This is the first time, realistically, I heard such a, rules as some of behavior that can be really applicable to to a parent-child relationship. So it's a really powerful session. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I want you to know there was a lady from the shul got your email and said, "Parents, I'm way beyond this. This has nothing to do with me. I'll listen a little bit." And she said she was very happy because it applied to relationships in general. So yeah, Baruch Hashem. I thank you for the opportunity to study this. Thank you very much.
You shouldn't criticize. I mean, you shouldn't punish them.
Yeah, there has to be punishment. 100% there has to be punishment. But again, that is a situationally specific thing. Bobby did this, right? So we have to see what the consequence is going to be.
You didn't mean criticize people saying wrong.
I don't mean specifically, just like that Rashi. Okay, that the Yaakov Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu, their criticism was going to be global. The criticism wasn't about a specific thing. Like Yaakov Avinu was criticizing the midos of Reuven. It wasn't something like stop doing this avera right now. That has to be done. It has to be attended to. But there's a tendency in people just to be critical. I mean, listen, sit with a group for 5 minutes, right, and talk about anything, and criticism will abound because people like to criticize. It's a pastime that people have, and unfortunately, with children, it is magnified.
So there's also criticism that is constructive criticism, and I think that's a little bit of the key. Just plain criticism is not going to work. It's just basically pointing out negative behavior, but not for a positive reason necessarily. It's just out of your own getting upset. But when it's constructive criticism, then you're out for the good of the other person. Then
even constructive criticism
you
doesn't
get negative
listen.
vibes.
You get negative vibes,
right.
And if you forget about a kid, if you tell me 5 things, I walk in one day and you say 5 things, constructive criticism. I'm gonna have to pick myself off the floor, right? It's the way we are. It's the way we are. So even with well administered, well expressed constructive criticism, it's who would have given better constructive criticism than Moshe Rabbeinu? Who would be more articulate than Moshe Rabbeinu? I don't mean the way he moved his mouth, okay?
But throughout his life, he was giving to Bnei Israel. He was always.
Okay, so that was for a particular avera. That was a particular avera. Here, it's more of a global thing. It's a midos thing. I think that's the difference here. Okay.